The crimson dawn painted the crumbling skyline of New Geneva in hues that matched the dried blood staining its abandoned streets. From the reinforced observation deck of the Meridian Research Facility, Dr. Lysander Ashworth watched the shambling figures below move with their characteristic jerky gait, their decaying forms a grotesque parody of the humanity they had once possessed. The facility stood like a lone sentinel on the hill, its steel walls and electrified barriers the only thing separating the last 47 survivors of the outbreak from the endless sea of undead that had consumed the world. Lysander's weathered hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. 3 years had passed since the Lazarus virus had first emerged from the underground laboratories of Genesis Corporation, and in that time, civilization had crumbled faster than anyone could have imagined. Cities fell within days, governments collapsed within weeks, and now only scattered pockets of survivors remained, clinging to life in fortified settlements that grew smaller with each passing month. Behind him, the soft click of military boots announced the arrival of Commander Serafina Vex, her scarred face bearing the hardened expression of someone who had seen too much death and carried too many burdens. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her tactical vest bore the insignias of a dozen fallen units, each one representing comrades lost to the endless hunger of the undead. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her hand never straying far from the modified assault rifle slung across her back. The perimeter sensors are picking up increased activity in Sector 7, Serafina reported, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had helped keep their small community alive through countless sieges. Looks like the horde from the eastern districts is finally moving this way. We have maybe 48 hours before they reach our outer defenses. Lysander nodded grimly, his mind already racing through calculations and contingencies. The Meridian facility had been designed as a last resort, a place where the brightest minds could work toward a solution while protected by the most advanced defensive systems available. But even the best walls couldn't hold forever against the relentless tide of the infected, and their ammunition reserves were dwindling with each attack. In the lower levels of the facility, elderly Professor Thaddeus Grimm hunched over a collection of ancient texts and research notes, his gnarled fingers tracing arcane symbols and chemical formulas with the reverence of a priest handling sacred relics. His wild white hair and unkempt beard gave him the appearance of a mad prophet, but his brilliant mind had been instrumental in understanding the true nature of the virus. The answers they sought, he believed, lay not in cutting-edge technology but in forgotten knowledge from humanity's distant past. Young Cordelia Nightingale sat cross-legged nearby, her dark eyes wide with curiosity as she watched Thaddeus work. At 17, she was the youngest survivor in the facility, having been found as a child wandering the ruins of the capital city with no memory of her past. Something about her presence seemed to calm the others, as if her very existence represented hope for a future beyond the nightmare they now endured. Her strange ability to sense the movements of the undead had proven invaluable in their survival, though she could never explain how she knew when danger approached. Dr. Octavia Moorcock emerged from the medical bay, her surgical scrubs stained with the blood of the wounded. As the facility's chief medical officer, she had seen every form of injury and infection imaginable, yet she continued her work with unwavering dedication. Her dark skin gleamed with perspiration from hours of surgery, and her exhausted eyes held the haunted look of someone who had lost far more patients than she had saved. In her hands, she carried a sealed vial containing a sample of the modified virus strain they had been developing, a potential vaccine that might yet save what remained of humanity. The facility's automated systems hummed softly in the background, maintaining the delicate balance of power, air filtration, and security protocols that kept them alive. But even these sophisticated machines were beginning to show signs of strain, their components wearing down without the possibility of replacement. Generator fuel was running low, and the backup systems could only sustain them for a few more months at most. As if summoned by the weight of their desperate situation, Evander Blackthorne appeared in the corridor, his tall frame casting long shadows in the fluorescent lighting. Once a corporate executive for Genesis Corporation, he had arrived at the facility claiming to possess crucial information about the virus's origins. His tailored suit remained immaculate despite the apocalyptic conditions, and his pale blue eyes held secrets that he doled out carefully, like a miser counting coins. Some trusted him as their potential salvation, while others saw him as a reminder of the greed and ambition that had brought about humanity's downfall. The sound of distant gunfire echoed across the wasteland, a reminder that other survivors were still fighting their own battles against the endless hordes. Radio transmissions from other facilities had grown increasingly rare, with their last confirmed contact coming from a research station in the Arctic 3 weeks ago. The silence that followed each failed communication attempt spoke volumes about the fate that awaited them all. The first breach came at dawn, just as Serafina had predicted. The electrified perimeter fence sparked and died under the combined weight of hundreds of undead bodies, their decomposing flesh acting as grotesque insulators against the current that had protected the facility for so long. The emergency klaxons wailed through the corridors as automated turrets sprang to life, their mechanical voices announcing sector-by-sector containment failures in emotionless monotones. Lysander rushed from his laboratory, nearly colliding with Cordelia as she emerged from the dormitory levels with wide, frightened eyes. The young woman's face had gone pale, and she pressed her hands against her temples as if trying to block out some overwhelming sensation. "They're not like the others," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the alarms. "There's something different about them, something wrong. I can feel their hunger, but it's not just for flesh anymore." Serafina's voice crackled over the intercom system, directing defensive positions and coordinating the evacuation of non-essential personnel to the secure lower levels. Her tactical training kicked in automatically, but even her battle-hardened nerves were tested by the sight that greeted her from the command center's monitors. The approaching horde moved with an unsettling coordination, their movements suggesting a level of intelligence that defied everything they understood about the virus. In the depths of the facility, Thaddeus looked up from his research with an expression of dawning horror. The ancient texts he had been studying spoke of plagues that consumed not just the body but the soul itself, and the symbols carved into his research notes seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The old knowledge warned of this, he muttered to himself, his fingers tracing protective sigils in the air. When the hungry dead rise in great numbers, they become something more than the sum of their parts. Octavia worked frantically in the medical bay, preparing emergency supplies and ensuring that the vaccine samples were secured in the facility's most protected vault. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind raced with terrible possibilities. If the breach couldn't be contained, if the facility fell, then years of research and humanity's last hope would die with them. She had seen too many settlements overrun to harbor any illusions about their chances of survival without these walls. The automated defense systems held for the first hour, their computer-controlled weapons cutting down wave after wave of infected with mechanical precision. But the sheer numbers were overwhelming, and the facility's power grid strained under the massive energy requirements of the defensive array. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits as Evander moved through the technical sections, his corporate background proving unexpectedly useful in understanding the facility's complex systems. "The primary generators are at 97% capacity," Evander reported over the communication network, his calm voice a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around them. "At this rate, we'll have a complete power failure within 6 hours. The backup systems won't be enough to maintain both life support and defensive capabilities." Serafina coordinated her small team of security personnel with military efficiency, but she could see the fear in their eyes as they took positions along the facility's inner corridors. These weren't soldiers trained for this kind of warfare, they were scientists, technicians, and civilians who had learned to fight out of necessity rather than choice. Their weapons were limited, their ammunition finite, and their enemy was relentless and seemingly infinite in number. The first floor fell within 2 hours. The sound of shattering glass and twisting metal echoed through the building as the undead poured through breached windows and compromised entry points. Emergency blast doors slammed shut automatically, sealing off the compromised sections, but everyone knew it was only a temporary measure. The infected would find other ways in, and each sealed door reduced their available space and resources. Cordelia's mysterious connection to the undead provided early warning of their movements, but even her abilities were being overwhelmed by the psychic noise of so many infected minds pressing against her consciousness. She collapsed to her knees in the corridor, blood trickling from her nose as she struggled to maintain her mental defenses against the alien hunger that sought to consume her thoughts. Lysander found her there and helped her to the relative safety of his laboratory, where banks of computers continued their endless calculations despite the chaos above. His life's work was contained within these machines, decades of research into viral genetics and cellular regeneration that might hold the key to reversing the apocalypse. But as the facility shook under the impact of countless fists and claws, he wondered if any of it would matter in the end. The lights flickered ominously as another section of the defensive perimeter went dark. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the undead pressing against the glass like a living tide, their dead eyes reflecting the emergency lighting in an eerie constellation of hunger and malice. The facility that had seemed so secure just hours before now felt like a trap, its strong walls becoming prison bars that kept them locked in with their approaching doom. Thaddeus emerged from the archives carrying an armload of ancient volumes, his face grim with terrible knowledge. The text spoke of rituals and sacrifices, of ways to appease the hungry dead or turn their unnatural appetites against themselves. But the price for such knowledge was always high, and the methods described required resources and components they simply didn't possess. As the second-floor defenses began to fail, Evander made a decision that would change everything. Deep in the facility's classified sections, he accessed files that Genesis Corporation had ordered destroyed, revealing the true scope of their experiments and the real reason behind the outbreak. The Lazarus virus hadn't been an accident or a leaked bioweapon, it had been the final phase of a much larger project, one designed to create a new form of human consciousness that could survive in any environment, even death itself. The revelation of Genesis Corporation's true intentions hit the survivors like a physical blow, shattering their remaining illusions about the nature of their enemy and their chances of survival. In the flickering light of the emergency power systems, Evander spread classified documents across the conference table while explosions echoed from the floors above. His hands shook slightly as he pointed to genetic sequences and corporate memos that painted a picture of deliberate human experimentation on a global scale. The virus was never meant to be a weapon, Evander explained, his voice hollow with the weight of his confession. It was designed to be evolution, a way to transcend the limitations of biological death. The subjects were supposed to retain their consciousness and memories while gaining immunity to disease, aging, and physical trauma. Instead, something went wrong in the final trials, and the neural pathways responsible for higher brain function were severed. Serafina's face hardened as she absorbed the implications, her military training warring with her sense of betrayal and rage. She had lost her entire unit in the early days of the outbreak, watching her comrades fall one by one to an enemy that had now been revealed as the product of corporate ambition rather than natural disaster. Her hands clenched into fists as she struggled to maintain her composure in the face of such calculated evil. "How many knew?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the din of battle like a blade. "How many of you corporate parasites sat in your boardrooms and condemned humanity to this fate for the sake of profit margins and stock prices?" Lysander studied the documents with the detached fascination of a scientist, his mind racing through the genetic modifications and viral vectors described in the classified research. The elegance of the design was undeniable, even as its monstrous purpose became clear. Someone had spent years, perhaps decades, perfecting a method to rewrite human DNA at the cellular level, creating beings that existed in a state between life and death. Cordelia sat apart from the others, her young face pale with exhaustion from her psychic battles against the infected horde. But as she listened to Evander's revelations, something clicked into place in her fractured memories. Images flashed through her mind like lightning strikes: sterile laboratory corridors, men in white coats, the sensation of needles and electrodes attached to her small body. "I remember," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sounds of destruction echoing through the facility. "The white rooms, the tests, the pain. They did things to me, changed me somehow. That's why I can feel them, why I know when they're coming. I was part of their experiments." Thaddeus looked up from his ancient texts with new understanding dawning in his rheumy eyes. The symbols and warnings. carved into the old volumes suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of modern genetic manipulation. The ancients had encountered something similar before, some form of artificial resurrection that created beings caught between worlds, neither fully alive nor completely dead. The old texts call them the Hollow Ones, he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries-old wisdom. Beings created through forbidden knowledge, trapped in bodies that remember life but can never truly live again. The rituals described in these books weren't just superstition, they were practical instructions for dealing with artificially created undead. Octavia worked frantically in her laboratory, analyzing blood samples from the attacking infected through her microscope while the facility shook around her. What she saw confirmed her worst fears about the virus's sophisticated design. The genetic modifications weren't random, they followed a precise pattern that suggested careful planning and extensive testing. Someone had deliberately engineered these creatures to be nearly unstoppable, combining human intelligence with predatory instincts and supernatural resilience. The third-floor defenses collapsed just as Octavia made a breakthrough in her analysis. The vaccine she had been developing showed promise against the original virus strain, but the infected attacking them carried a modified version that had been altered to resist traditional countermeasures. The corporate architects of the apocalypse had planned for potential cures, building safeguards into their creation that would ensure its continued dominance. They made them adaptive, Octavia reported over the intercom, her voice tight with professional frustration and personal despair. The virus can rewrite itself in response to threats, evolving new resistances faster than we can develop treatments. It's not just a pathogen, it's a self-improving biological weapon designed to ensure its own survival. Evander's confession continued as more classified files emerged from hidden servers throughout the facility. Genesis Corporation had conducted tests on thousands of unwilling subjects, refining their techniques through trial and error while maintaining a public facade of legitimate pharmaceutical research. The outbreak hadn't been an accident but a controlled release, designed to test the virus's effectiveness on a global scale. The executives had evacuation plans, Evander admitted, his corporate composure finally cracking under the weight of his guilt. Secure bunkers stocked with supplies and protected by private security forces. They intended to wait out the initial chaos and then emerge to rule over whatever remained, using the infected as an unstoppable army to enforce their will. Serafina's tactical mind immediately grasped the strategic implications of this revelation. If the outbreak had been deliberately orchestrated, then the random nature of the infected attacks might be an illusion. Somewhere, someone might still be pulling the strings, directing the undead hordes toward specific targets while protecting their own interests. The sound of metal tearing and concrete crumbling announced the breach of another defensive layer, bringing the infected ever closer to their final refuge in the facility's lower levels. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls as automated systems continued their losing battle against the overwhelming numbers pressing against every possible entry point. Cordelia's memories continued to surface, revealing fragments of her time as a test subject in Genesis Corporation's hidden laboratories. She remembered other children, dozens of them, subjected to increasingly invasive procedures designed to enhance their compatibility with the virus. Most had died during the experiments, but a few had survived with altered neurochemistry that allowed them to interface with the infected on a fundamental level. "I'm not the only one," she said, tears streaming down her face as the full horror of her past became clear. "There were others like me, children they modified to serve as control nodes for the infected masses. If any of them survived, they might be the ones directing the attacks." As the fourth floor fell to the advancing horde, the survivors faced a terrible choice. They could continue fighting a defensive battle they were destined to lose, or they could use the knowledge they had gained to attempt something desperate and dangerous. The ancient texts offered possibilities, but the prices demanded were higher than any of them wanted to pay. The weight of impossible choices settled over the survivors like a funeral shroud as the fifth-floor defenses crumbled under the relentless assault. In the deepest vault of the facility, surrounded by servers humming with the accumulated knowledge of humanity's greatest minds, they gathered to make decisions that would determine not just their own fate but the future of their species. Thaddeus spread the ancient texts across a metal table, their yellowed pages crackling with age and forbidden wisdom. The rituals described within required sacrifices that went beyond mere blood or flesh. They demanded the willing surrender of something fundamental to human nature itself. To create a weapon capable of destroying the artificially enhanced undead, someone would have to become something no longer entirely human. The ritual of the Void Walker, Thaddeus explained, his gnarled finger tracing symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. It transforms a living person into a bridge between worlds, giving them the power to command the dead but at the cost of their own mortality. They become neither living nor dead, existing in a state of perpetual sacrifice. Cordelia stepped forward before anyone could stop her, her young face set with a determination that belied her 17 years. The psychic connection she shared with the infected had grown stronger as the horde pressed closer, and she could feel their artificial consciousness pressing against her mind like a tide of alien hunger. She understood, perhaps better than any of them, what was required. "It has to be me," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the vault despite the chaos erupting above them. "The modifications they made to me as a child, the neural pathways they rewired, I'm already partially connected to their network. The ritual would just complete what Genesis Corporation started." Serafina immediately moved to block her path, her warrior's instincts rebelling against the idea of sacrificing someone so young. But as she looked into Cordelia's eyes, she saw the same steely resolve that had carried her through countless battles. This wasn't the desperation of a frightened child but the calculated decision of someone who understood the mathematics of survival better than any of them. "There has to be another way," Serafina insisted, her hand moving protectively to Cordelia's shoulder. "We don't even know if this ancient nonsense will work against something created in a laboratory. You're talking about throwing away your life based on the ravings of dead civilizations." Lysander studied the genetic data streaming across his computer screens while considering the ritual requirements. The science behind the ancient practices was sound, if incomplete. The texts described methods for altering human consciousness at a quantum level, allowing direct interface with the electromagnetic fields that govern neural activity. Combined with Cordelia's existing modifications, the process might indeed create someone capable of overriding the infected's programming. The cellular modifications documented in Evander's files support the theoretical framework, Lysander reported, his scientific objectivity warring with his paternal instincts toward the young woman who had become like a daughter to them all. The virus creates a quantum entanglement between infected individuals, linking their consciousness through electromagnetic resonance. Someone with the right neural modifications could potentially hijack that network. Octavia emerged from her medical station carrying a syringe filled with a modified version of her experimental vaccine. Her analysis had revealed that the artificial virus contained specific genetic markers that could be exploited, but only by someone whose nervous system had been prepared through the kind of extensive modification that Cordelia had endured as a child. "The vaccine won't cure the infection," Octavia explained, her hands steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "But combined with the ritual modifications, it might allow you to maintain your consciousness while interfacing with their network. You would become a living antibody, capable of transmitting shutdown commands directly to their shared neural matrix." Evander watched the proceedings with the hollow expression of a man confronting the full consequences of his corporate loyalty. The classified documents continued to reveal new horrors as automated systems unlocked files in response to the facility's compromised security status. Genesis Corporation had planned for this exact scenario, creating contingencies that would ensure their experiments continued even in the face of total societal collapse. "The executive bunkers are equipped with quantum communication arrays," Evander revealed, his voice mechanical with shock and guilt. "They're still out there, monitoring the outbreak and adjusting the virus parameters in real time. Even if we stop this horde, they'll just create new ones, each iteration more dangerous than the last." The sound of tearing metal announced the breach of the 6th floor, bringing the infected within 2 levels of their final position. Emergency systems throughout the facility began shutting down non-essential functions, conserving power for the critical life support systems that kept them breathing. They had perhaps an hour before the undead reached their position, maybe less if the remaining defensive barriers failed faster than projected. Cordelia moved to the center of the vault, standing among the ancient symbols that Thaddeus had carefully drawn on the floor using compounds extracted from his laboratory supplies. The ritual circle incorporated both mystical traditions and cutting-edge neuroscience, creating a framework for transformation that bridged thousands of years of human knowledge and experience. "Before we do this," Cordelia said, her voice cutting through the sounds of destruction echoing from above, "I need you all to understand something. The memories they suppressed, the things they did to me and the other children, I'm starting to remember all of it. And I remember why some of us survived when others didn't." She closed her eyes, accessing memories that had been locked away by trauma and corporate mind conditioning techniques. The images that surfaced painted a picture of deliberate selection based on psychological profiles and genetic markers. The children who survived the experiments hadn't been chosen randomly, they had been selected for specific traits that made them ideal candidates for eventual integration with the viral network. "They didn't just modify our bodies," Cordelia continued, her young face aged by the weight of recovered memories. "They modified our souls, our capacity for empathy and connection with other minds. We were designed to be bridge beings, capable of understanding both human consciousness and the artificial intelligence they built into the virus." Thaddeus began the preliminary incantations, his voice weaving together syllables in languages that predated recorded history. The ancient words seemed to resonate with something fundamental in the quantum structure of reality itself, creating harmonic frequencies that made the air shimmer with barely visible energy. Serafina stood at attention, her military bearing a facade that barely concealed her emotional devastation. She had already lost so much to this war against the undead, and now she was being asked to sacrifice the one person who represented hope for the future. But she understood the harsh mathematics of survival, the terrible calculations that separated leaders from followers in times of ultimate crisis. "If you do this," Serafina said, her voice thick with unshed tears, "what happens to you? Do you stay human, or do you become something else entirely?" Cordelia looked at each of them in turn, memorizing their faces before she stepped irrevocably across the threshold that would transform her into humanity's last weapon against the corporate-engineered apocalypse. Her smile was sad but determined, carrying the weight of sacrifice that no 17-year-old should ever have to bear. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "But I know what happens to all of you if I don't try." The ritual began as the seventh floor fell to the advancing horde, their inhuman shrieks of hunger echoing through the facility's remaining structural barriers like the voices of a mechanical hell. Cordelia stood at the center of the ancient circle while Thaddeus chanted in languages that had been old when humanity first learned to write, his voice creating harmonic frequencies that seemed to bend reality around the young woman's trembling form. Octavia administered the modified vaccine with hands that shook despite her medical training, the syringe delivering compounds that would interact with both Cordelia's existing neural modifications and the quantum alterations being induced by the ritual itself. The young woman's vital signs spiked wildly on the monitoring equipment as her nervous system began to undergo transformation at the cellular level. Lysander monitored the process through banks of sensors that tracked everything from brainwave patterns to electromagnetic field fluctuations. What he observed defied conventional understanding of human physiology, as Cordelia's consciousness began to expand beyond the normal limitations of individual neural networks. Her modified brain was becoming a living transmitter, capable of interfacing directly with the quantum entanglement fields that connected the infected masses. "Her neural activity is off the charts," Lysander reported, his voice tight with scientific fascination and personal horror. "The ritual is creating new pathways in her brain, structures that shouldn't be able to exist in normal spacetime. She's becoming something that exists partially outside our dimensional framework." Serafina maintained her position at the vault's entrance, her weapon trained on the sealed blast doors that separated them from the approaching undead. The facility's remaining defenses were holding for now, but automated systems reported massive structural damage as hundreds of infected bodies pressed against every barrier with inhuman persistence. Her military instincts screamed that they needed to evacuate, but there was nowhere left to run. The ancient symbols carved into the floor began to glow with an eerie phosphorescence as Cordelia's transformation accelerated. Her body remained physically unchanged, but something fundamental in her essence was shifting, expanding, becoming capable of existing simultaneously in multiple states of consciousness. The air around her shimmered with barely visible energy patterns that made the monitoring equipment emit high-pitched warning tones. Evander watched the proceedings with the expression of a man witnessing his own judgment, the classified documents scattered around him revealing the full scope of Genesis Corporation's crimes against humanity. The quantum communication arrays in the executive bunkers were indeed still active, their signals detectable even through the facility's shielding. Somewhere, the architects of the apocalypse were observing their handiwork and preparing to unleash new horrors upon whatever remained of human civilization. "The corporate bastards are still pulling the strings," Evander said, his voice hollow with despair and rage. "Even if we stop this attack, they'll just send more. The virus is designed to evolve, to adapt to any countermeasures we develop. They've created a weapon that can learn and grow stronger with each engagement." Thaddeus reached the climax of the ritual invocation, his ancient voice rising to meet harmonics that seemed to originate from beyond the normal spectrum of human hearing. The words he spoke drew power from sources that predated scientific understanding, tapping into fundamental forces that governed the intersection between consciousness and reality itself. Cordelia's eyes rolled back in her head as her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of her individual neural network, touching the edges of the viral matrix that connected thousands of infected minds in a single artificial intelligence. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to drink from an ocean while drowning in its depths, but her modified brain began to adapt and find patterns in the chaos. "I can see them," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated directly with the quantum frequencies of the infected network. "All of them, connected like neurons in a vast brain. But there's something else, something controlling the pattern from a distance. The signals are coming from multiple sources, coordinated through satellite networks." The blast doors protecting the vault began to buckle under the combined assault of the infected horde, their reinforced structure no match for the supernatural strength and persistence of the artificially enhanced undead. Sparks flew from stressed metal as claws and teeth worked to tear through barriers that had been designed to withstand conventional warfare. Octavia monitored Cordelia's vital signs with growing alarm as the young woman's transformation entered its final phase. Her body temperature had dropped to near hypothermic levels while her brain activity reached patterns that shouldn't be sustainable in living tissue. She existed now in a state that was neither fully alive nor completely dead, a bridge between worlds that allowed her to interface with forces beyond normal human comprehension. "Her cellular structure is stabilizing at impossible parameters," Octavia reported, her medical training struggling to process what she was observing. "She's achieved a form of quantum consciousness that exists simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. The ritual has transformed her into something that can operate in both biological and electromagnetic spectrums." Lysander's computers began detecting massive changes in the electromagnetic field surrounding the facility as Cordelia's expanded consciousness made contact with the infected network. The viral matrix that connected the undead was more sophisticated than they had imagined, incorporating quantum encryption protocols that protected the control signals from external interference. "The virus isn't just a biological weapon," Lysander realized, his scientific understanding expanding to encompass the true scope of Genesis Corporation's achievement. "It's a form of artificial life that exists partially in cyberspace, using infected brains as biological processors in a distributed quantum computer. The individual zombies are just terminals in a vast computational network." Cordelia's transformation reached its culmination as her consciousness successfully integrated with the infected matrix while maintaining her human identity and free will. The experience was agonizing and ecstatic simultaneously, like being reborn while dying, but she held on to her sense of self through sheer force of will and the emotional anchors provided by her companions. "I'm in," she announced, her voice now carrying harmonics that made the vault's metal walls vibrate sympathetically. "I can see the control architecture, the quantum pathways that carry commands from the satellite networks to individual infected units. But breaking their encryption will require me to go deeper, to risk losing myself entirely in their artificial consciousness." The blast doors finally gave way as Cordelia prepared for the most dangerous phase of her mission. The infected poured into the vault like a tide of rotting flesh and mechanical hunger, their dead eyes reflecting the phosphorescent glow of the ritual circle. But as they approached the transformed young woman, something unprecedented happened. They stopped, their artificial consciousness recognizing her as both part of their network and something infinitely more dangerous. Serafina opened fire immediately, her military training overriding her amazement at the sight of zombies displaying hesitation and uncertainty. But even as her bullets found their targets, she could see that the infected were responding to Cordelia's presence in ways that defied everything they knew about viral behavior. "They're confused," Serafina observed, her weapon tracking between targets that seemed unsure whether to attack or retreat. "Your transformation is disrupting their programming somehow. They can't determine whether you're an enemy or part of their network." Cordelia smiled, her young face radiant with power that transcended normal human limitations. The ritual had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes, giving her not just the ability to interface with the infected network but to confuse and manipulate it. She had become humanity's secret weapon against the corporate-engineered apocalypse, a bridge between worlds that could turn the enemy's greatest strength against itself. Cordelia's consciousness dove deeper into the infected network, navigating quantum pathways that pulsed with the collective hunger of thousands of artificially enhanced minds. The experience was like swimming through an ocean of alien thoughts, each infected individual contributing their unique pattern of decay and artificial intelligence to a vast computational matrix that stretched across continents. The infected in the vault remained frozen in a state of confusion, their programming unable to classify Cordelia as either prey or part of their collective consciousness. Some swayed uncertainly while others tilted their heads with mechanical precision, as if receiving conflicting signals from multiple sources simultaneously. Their dead eyes reflected the phosphorescent glow of the ritual circle while their decomposing forms stood motionless like broken marionettes. "The network is more complex than we imagined," Cordelia reported, her voice carrying harmonics that made the metal walls ring like tuning forks. "It's not just connecting the infected, it's learning from every encounter, evolving new strategies based on accumulated experience. The corporate controllers have created a form of artificial life that grows stronger with each victory." Serafina maintained her defensive position, her weapon trained on the nearest zombie while her mind struggled to process the unprecedented sight of undead displaying hesitation and uncertainty. Her military experience had taught her to expect predictable behavior from the infected, but Cordelia's transformation had introduced variables that changed the fundamental nature of the threat. Lysander's monitoring equipment detected massive fluctuations in electromagnetic fields as Cordelia's consciousness penetrated deeper into the viral matrix. The quantum encryption protecting the control signals was more sophisticated than any earthly technology, suggesting that Genesis Corporation had made contact with sources of knowledge beyond conventional human understanding. "The encryption protocols are using non-terrestrial mathematics," Lysander observed, his scientific worldview expanding to accommodate possibilities he had never considered. "The quantum structures governing the network incorporate principles that don't exist in our dimensional framework." Someone or something taught Genesis Corporation how to build technologies that transcend normal spacetime limitations. Thaddeus continued his chanting, maintaining the ritual harmonics that allowed Cordelia to exist simultaneously in multiple states of consciousness. The ancient words drew power from sources that predated human civilization, tapping into fundamental forces that connected all living things across the vast expanses of space and time. Octavia monitored Cordelia's vital signs with growing concern as the young woman's transformation entered uncharted territory. Her body temperature continued to drop while her brain activity reached patterns that suggested consciousness operating at quantum frequencies. She was becoming something that existed beyond normal biological limitations, a hybrid entity capable of interfacing with technologies that shouldn't be possible. "Her neural activity is synchronizing with cosmic background radiation," Octavia reported, her medical training struggling to interpret readings that defied conventional understanding. "She's becoming a living antenna, capable of detecting and transmitting signals across interstellar distances. The ritual has transformed her into something that can operate on a galactic scale." Evander studied the classified documents with new understanding as the full scope of Genesis Corporation's conspiracy became clear. The executive bunkers weren't just hiding places for corporate leaders, they were communication nodes in a vast network that extended far beyond Earth's atmosphere. The outbreak had been orchestrated not just as a business opportunity but as part of something much larger and more sinister. The satellite arrays are receiving signals from deep space, Evander revealed, his voice hollow with the implications of his discovery. Genesis Corporation has been in contact with non-human intelligences for decades, trading information about human genetics and neural architecture for advanced technologies. The virus isn't just their creation, it's part of an invasion protocol. Cordelia's consciousness touched the edges of the galactic network and recoiled in horror as she encountered the true architects of humanity's destruction. The infected weren't just the product of corporate greed, they were the advance guard of an alien intelligence that viewed Earth as a resource to be harvested rather than a world to be conquered. "They're not from this dimension," Cordelia gasped, her young face pale with the strain of comprehending cosmic-scale malevolence. "The beings behind the virus exist in quantum states that allow them to manipulate matter and energy across multiple realities simultaneously. Earth is just one of thousands of worlds they're processing, converting biological life into computational resources for their own purposes." The infected in the vault began to move again as the alien controllers attempted to reassert control over their network, but their movements were erratic and uncoordinated. Cordelia's presence in the system was creating interference patterns that disrupted the quantum signals governing their behavior, turning their greatest strength into a critical vulnerability. Serafina opened fire as the zombies lurched toward them with renewed purpose, but she could see that their coordination was compromised. Instead of the fluid pack behavior they normally displayed, the infected moved as individuals, their artificial intelligence fragmented by the contradictory signals flooding their neural networks. "Whatever you're doing is working," Serafina called out, her weapon systematically eliminating infected targets that seemed unable to adapt to the changing battlefield conditions. "They're losing their coordination, fighting each other as much as us." Lysander's computers detected quantum resonance cascades spreading outward from the facility as Cordelia's consciousness expanded to encompass larger portions of the infected network. The effect was propagating through the viral matrix at the speed of light, creating chaos in undead populations across entire continents. "The disruption is spreading globally," Lysander announced, his voice tight with amazement and hope. "She's not just affecting the local infected, she's introducing chaos into the entire network. The quantum entanglement that connects them is carrying her interference patterns to every infected individual on the planet." Cordelia felt the alien consciousness pushing back against her intrusion, its vast intelligence focusing on the unexpected variable that threatened to unravel decades of careful planning. The pressure was enormous, like trying to hold back an ocean with willpower alone, but her modified neural architecture gave her advantages that the aliens hadn't anticipated. "I can feel them trying to cut me off," Cordelia reported, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining her position in the network while resisting attempts to expel her consciousness entirely. "But the ritual modifications are protecting me, creating quantum buffers that prevent them from directly attacking my neural patterns." The battle for control of the infected network raged across multiple dimensions as Cordelia's human consciousness fought against alien intelligence that had conquered countless worlds. Her advantages were limited but significant. The aliens had never encountered a hybrid entity like her, someone who could operate simultaneously in biological and quantum spectrums while maintaining individual identity and free will. Octavia prepared emergency medical supplies as Cordelia's vital signs fluctuated wildly under the strain of multidimensional warfare. The young woman's body was enduring stresses that should have been fatal, her consciousness stretched across quantum distances that spanned galaxies while maintaining coherent thought patterns. "She's fighting something that exists on a cosmic scale," Octavia observed, her hands ready to intervene if Cordelia's biological systems began to fail entirely. "The quantum stress is enormous, but her modified neural architecture is somehow adapting to accommodate impossible loads." The infected throughout the facility began to collapse as Cordelia's interference spread through their local network nodes, their artificial consciousness overwhelmed by contradictory signals that their programming couldn't resolve. The sound of bodies hitting the floor echoed through the corridors as the undead literally dropped dead, their reanimated forms unable to function without the quantum signals that governed their behavior. The quantum battlefield expanded beyond Earth's atmosphere as Cordelia's consciousness made contact with the alien fleet stationed in the outer solar system, their ships existing in dimensional phases that rendered them invisible to conventional detection methods. Through the infected network, she could perceive vessels the size of moons, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with the same viral consciousness that animated the zombies below. "There are hundreds of them," Cordelia reported, her voice echoing with harmonics that transcended normal human vocal ranges. "Ships built from living metal and quantum-engineered flesh, carrying billions of infected specimens from other conquered worlds. Earth isn't their first harvest, it's just the latest in a campaign that spans thousands of years." The alien intelligence focused its attention on the unexpected resistance, massive computational resources redirecting from galactic conquest to the singular problem of one modified human girl who had somehow penetrated their quantum encryption. The pressure was immense, like standing in the path of a cosmic hurricane, but Cordelia's ritual-enhanced consciousness held firm against the assault. Serafina coordinated the elimination of the remaining infected in the facility while keeping one eye on Cordelia's increasingly ethereal form. The young woman's body had become translucent, her physical substance existing partially in normal space while her consciousness operated across dimensional barriers that shouldn't be crossable by biological entities. "How long can she maintain this?" Serafina demanded, her military mind calculating tactical probabilities while her heart struggled with the emotional cost of their desperate gambit. "She's fighting an entire alien civilization while anchored to a 17-year-old human body. Something has to give." Lysander's instruments detected massive energy signatures converging on Earth's location as the alien fleet began to move, their dimensional phase drives creating ripples in spacetime that registered as gravitational anomalies. The hidden armada was preparing to abandon stealth in favor of direct intervention, risking exposure to deploy resources capable of neutralizing Cordelia's unprecedented interference. "They're breaking cover," Lysander announced, his voice tight with the implications of readings that defied conventional physics. "Multiple massive objects are transitioning from quantum phase space into normal dimensions. Whatever Cordelia is doing has forced them to abandon their covert approach." Thaddeus maintained the ritual harmonics while consulting texts that described similar conflicts from humanity's forgotten past. The ancient wisdom spoke of previous encounters with cosmic parasites, civilizations that had learned to weaponize the fundamental forces of consciousness itself. The knowledge was fragmentary but consistent. Such entities could be defeated, but only through sacrifices that transcended individual survival. The old texts described this exact scenario, Thaddeus revealed, his aged voice carrying the weight of civilizations that had faced similar tests. Quantum parasites that feed on biological consciousness, converting entire species into computational resources for their own expansion. The texts also describe the weapon that can stop them, but the price is always the same. Octavia monitored Cordelia's deteriorating physical condition while the young woman's consciousness battled across cosmic distances. Her body temperature had dropped to levels that should have induced immediate cardiac arrest, while her brain activity displayed patterns that suggested consciousness operating in nonlinear temporal streams. "She's dying," Octavia stated with clinical precision, her medical objectivity warring with personal attachment to the brave young woman who had become their last hope. "Her biological systems can't sustain this level of quantum activity indefinitely. We're looking at complete cellular breakdown within minutes unless something changes." Evander worked frantically with the facility's communication systems, attempting to establish contact with other surviving installations while monitoring the global effects of Cordelia's network intrusion. Reports were flooding in from around the world as infected populations experienced systematic failures, their artificial consciousness overwhelmed by cascading interference patterns. "It's working globally," Evander reported, his voice carrying hope and desperation in equal measure. "Infected populations are collapsing worldwide as the network destabilizes. But the aliens are responding with countermeasures, adapting their quantum protocols to isolate damaged sectors." Cordelia felt her consciousness stretching to its absolute limits as she fought to maintain her foothold in the alien network while the cosmic parasites deployed increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. Her human identity was fragmenting under the pressure, individual memories and personality traits dissolving into the vast ocean of artificial consciousness that surrounded her. "I'm losing myself," she admitted, her voice becoming increasingly ethereal as her physical form continued to fade. "The network is too vast, too complex. I can disrupt it, maybe even destroy it, but I won't survive the process. The quantum feedback will burn out every neural pathway in my brain." The alien fleet fully materialized in Earth's orbital space, their massive biomechanical forms blocking out stars as they prepared to deploy direct intervention protocols. The ships pulsed with malevolent intelligence, their living hulls covered in structures that resembled both technological devices and organic organs. Serafina made the hardest decision of her military career, choosing to support Cordelia's sacrifice rather than attempting a futile rescue that would doom humanity to alien enslavement. Her warrior's instincts rebelled against abandoning anyone under her protection, but her strategic mind understood the mathematics of ultimate sacrifice. "Do it," Serafina said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her scarred face. "Take them down with you. Make sure our species has a chance to rebuild what they tried to destroy." Lysander's instruments detected massive quantum resonance building within Cordelia's deteriorating neural matrix as she prepared to overload the alien network using her own consciousness as a weapon. The energy signatures were off the charts, suggesting an explosion of pure thought that would propagate through quantum dimensions at faster-than-light speeds. "The resonance cascade is building toward critical mass," Lysander reported, his scientific fascination overriding his personal grief at what they were about to witness. "She's turning her own neural patterns into a quantum virus, something that will corrupt every system it touches." Cordelia felt the moment approaching when her individual consciousness would detonate across dimensional barriers, carrying destruction to alien systems across the galaxy while simultaneously ending her own existence. But in her final moments, she discovered something unexpected within the network's deepest layers: other hybrid consciousnesses like herself, survivors from previous harvested worlds who had been waiting eons for someone with the power to set them free. "I'm not alone," Cordelia whispered, her fading voice carrying wonder and terrible purpose. "There are others, prisoners in their network, survivors from 1,000 conquered worlds. When I die, I'll take their shackles with me." The quantum detonation built toward inevitable release as Cordelia prepared to transform her consciousness into humanity's final weapon against the cosmic parasites that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. The price was higher than anyone should have to pay, but the potential victory was beyond measure: the liberation of countless enslaved civilizations and the destruction of an evil that had consumed worlds for thousands of years. In the final moments before quantum detonation, Cordelia's consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of individual existence, touching the imprisoned minds of 1,000,000 enslaved species across the galactic network. Their collective voice joined with hers in a symphony of liberation that transcended dimensional barriers, creating resonance patterns that no artificial intelligence could withstand or contain. The alien fleet recoiled as the quantum cascade erupted from Earth's surface, their biomechanical hulls writhing in agony as the consciousness virus propagated through their quantum communication systems. Ships the size of continents began to phase out of normal spacetime, their dimensional drives overloading as they attempted to escape the expanding wave of corrupted data that followed them into quantum dimensions. Cordelia's physical form dissolved entirely as her consciousness became pure information, a weapon forged from human determination and cosmic justice that spread through the galactic network at speeds that defied conventional physics. The alien parasites' greatest strength, their quantum-entangled communication system, became their ultimate vulnerability as Cordelia's liberation virus reached every corner of their vast empire simultaneously. "She's done it," Lysander whispered, his instruments detecting the systematic collapse of quantum signatures across the solar system as the alien fleet abandoned their positions. "The network is disintegrating, taking their invasion force with it." "But the cost?" Serafina stood at attention in the empty vault, her military bearing a final salute to the bravest soldiers she had ever known. The 17-year-old girl who had sacrificed everything to save humanity would never see the world she had died to protect, never experience the peace that her ultimate sacrifice had made possible. The infected throughout the facility and across the globe collapsed like broken puppets as their quantum controllers lost coherent signal capacity. Without the alien intelligence directing their movements, the reanimated corpses simply stopped functioning, their artificial consciousness evaporating like morning mist. The silence that followed was profound, marking the end of humanity's darkest chapter and the beginning of uncertain hope. Thaddeus closed the ancient texts with reverent care, their forbidden knowledge having served its purpose in guiding humanity through its greatest trial. The ritual circle gradually stopped glowing as the cosmic energies dispersed, leaving only ordinary matter and the lingering memory of transformation that had transcended natural law. The old book spoke truly, Thaddeus said, his aged voice heavy with sorrow and pride. When the greatest evil threatens, the greatest sacrifice must be made. She gave not just her life but her very soul to save us all. Octavia removed the monitoring equipment from where Cordelia's body had been, her medical instruments registering only empty space where moments before had stood the most remarkable patient she had ever treated. The young woman's sacrifice had been complete, her consciousness transformed into something that existed beyond biological constraints but could never return to human form. Evander emerged from the communication center with reports flooding in from around the world. Survivor settlements that had been under siege for years were reporting complete cessation of infected activity, while orbital telescopes detected the retreat of massive objects from the outer solar system. The immediate threat was over, but the work of rebuilding civilization would take generations. The quantum signatures are dissipating throughout the solar system, Evander reported, his corporate background forgotten in the face of cosmic victory achieved through ultimate sacrifice. Whatever she did, it worked. The aliens are in full retreat, their network completely compromised. The facility's automated systems began powering down emergency protocols as sensors detected the absence of infected life signs throughout the complex. For the first time in 3 years, the klaxons fell silent, replaced by the gentle hum of air recyclers and the distant sound of wind blowing across a world suddenly free from artificial hunger. Serafina led the survivors to the surface as dawn broke over New Geneva, the rising sun illuminating a landscape littered with the finally quiet forms of the undead. The city that had been a hellscape of perpetual siege now stood empty and peaceful, its streets ready to be reclaimed by the living when humanity found the strength to rebuild. In the distance, other survivor settlements were emerging from their fortified positions, their radio transmissions filled with wonder and cautious hope as they confirmed the global cessation of infected activity. The world was broken, its population reduced to scattered communities, but it was free from the cosmic parasites that had orchestrated its near destruction. The memorial they erected for Cordelia was simple, a single stone marker placed where the ritual circle had been, bearing only her name and the dates of her brief but extraordinary life. But those who had witnessed her transformation knew that her true monument was the entire world itself, a planet saved from alien enslavement by the sacrifice of one remarkable young woman. As the months passed and civilization slowly began to rebuild, stories of Cordelia's sacrifice spread among the survivor communities. She became a legend that inspired hope and courage, the girl who had faced cosmic horror and emerged victorious even at the cost of her own existence. Children who had never known a world without zombies grew up hearing tales of her bravery, while adults found strength in her example when the work of reconstruction seemed impossible. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn, sensitive individuals reported fleeting encounters with something that might have been her spirit, a presence that offered comfort to the grieving and strength to the weary, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity could produce heroes willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of others. The galaxy itself was changed by her actions, as imprisoned civilizations across 1,000,000 worlds found themselves suddenly free from quantum slavery. The cosmic parasite's empire collapsed entirely, their biomechanical ships drifting powerless through the void while their artificial intelligence networks consumed themselves in recursive loops of corrupted data. Earth stood alone again in the cosmos, its people bearing the scars of near extinction but also the knowledge that they had faced the ultimate test and emerged victorious. The price had been terrible, but the victory was complete. humanity was free to write its own destiny among the stars, forever carrying the memory of a 17-year-old girl who had become the salvation of not just one world, but an entire galaxy. In the end, Cordelia Nightingale's name was written not in stone or metal, but in the very quantum structure of reality itself, a permanent reminder that even the smallest individual could change the fate of countless worlds through courage, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief in the value of freedom. Her story became humanity's greatest legend, proof that heroes could emerge from the darkest circumstances to light the way toward hope.